Hey, it's your old pal Lucid Stew again, and in this video we're doing a California High-Speed Rail 2025 Supplemental Project Update Report Deep Dive. This document was recently released by the California High-Speed Rail Authority. I'll also do my best to analyze this information based on the knowledge I've gained from paying close attention to the project for the last 3 years. Before we dive in, let me announce that the state of California just re-upped their Cap and Invest program through 2045 with a $1 billion minimum yearly commitment to California high-speed rail. That significantly changes the interpretation of the document we're about to get into, so now we can dive in. Page 1. Here we are introduced to the concept of project phase scenarios. This seems like something you'd want to handle before starting the project, but here we are doing it 10 years into construction. The concepts are: Merced to Bakersfield as an initial operating segment was supported by Governor Gavin Newsom when he came into office. That is an attempt to go from the 119 miles they're building now that connects nothing to actual service between cities within a scope that the authority can afford. Gilroy to Bakersfield. This is a variation on an existing theme, which the authority coined Valley to Valley. The idea has been to connect to San Francisco and the Silicon Valley after the Central Valley portion is completed in order to start generating an operating profit that the authority could then reinvest into the project. Here the difference is that they're temporarily ditching at least some of the 110 mile per hour build out in favor of a more Caltrain-like service between Gilroy and San Francisco. And lastly, Gilroy to Palmdale. The idea here is to extend from Bakersfield to Palmdale in the south to utilize two other existing projects, the High Desert Corridor and Brightline West, to connect California high-speed rail to something that will generate more revenue without having to spend the additional roughly $40 billion it's going to take to get to LA Union Station from Palmdale. The High Desert Corridor is a 54-mile initiative, mostly by LA County, to link the California high-speed rail and Brightline West routes. And of course, Brightline West proposes to link Rancho Cucamonga, California and the Las Vegas area with a route that would average about 100 miles per hour and provide a roughly 90-minute trip from where it would hook up with the High Desert Corridor in Apple Valley. This would result in roughly 2 hours to Las Vegas, in addition to however fast California high-speed rail could get you to Palmdale from San Francisco and parts south. This is the initial phase of the Southwest high-speed rail concept. I made a video about it, check it out. Merced to Bakersfield, let's get into the weeds. The new CEO and his new group are saying that they actually saved us $14 billion by increasing the budget for Merced to Bakersfield by $1.4 billion, and that the prior cost for that segment was actually $51 billion and not $35 billion as reported. This means someone has been lying or covering things up, which is no surprise if you've paid attention to the slimy way they've been avoiding updates to cost projections the last 5 years. How did they save $14 billion? A lot of that is supposedly from removing design, engineering, and scheduling inefficiencies, but also, quote, temporarily cutting down station size and amenities in the Central Valley. All of that results in a new estimated cost of $36.75 billion for Merced to Bakersfield. Next up, they claim that revenue service can start on this section by January 1st, 2032. That is, if everything goes smoothly with construction. Things have been running to schedule lately. When combined with the new funding, I'm currently pretty confident about 2032. Let me repeat that. I do currently believe that California high-speed rail trains will be operating within 7 years or so. This is a different document, but the authority figures that with the $15 billion of new cap and invest money that they just got and will likely be able to finance, they would have a little over $6 billion left over once Merced to Bakersfield is done. However, if you subtract the $4.2 billion in federal funds being held up currently, the margin becomes worryingly slim, so there is astonishingly still a danger that they could come up short on Merced to Bakersfield. They haven't been drawing their contingency down by very much lately, so I think 2.1 billion extra will be enough to cover any surprises. The main takeaway here is that it looks like Merced to Bakersfield will happen within the 2030 to 2033 range that the authorities set up as a goal a couple of years ago. That is if Merced continues to be a goal, and I'll touch on that more in a bit. Moving on to operations, they're now projecting ridership between 1.6 and 2.2 million trips a year, which is down from the prior estimate of 2.3 million in the 2024 business plan. They're now estimating an operating deficit of 30 to 65 million a year on that segment. That's also down from 80 million. The plan is to run 8 round trips a day. This cannot be the end point for California high-speed rail. The worst case scenario really is to finish and operate only Merced to Bakersfield as a high-speed rail line. That is because it is absurdly expensive for what you get and can never be worth it. This thing has to either be stopped after the initial 119 miles of construction and then tied into BNSF track to be used conventionally, or it has to get out of the Central Valley. Nothing between makes sense. That brings us to the next concept, Bakersfield to Gilroy. Gilroy is a sleepy, mid-sized suburb of San Jose that lies in the Santa Clarita Valley. To get between the two valleys, there is a mountain crossing at the Pacheco Pass with some tunneling. A connection at Gilroy assumes some improvements between Gilroy and San Francisco that fall short of a full build-out. This includes electrification between Gilroy and San Jose, as well as at least one additional track. Platforms would also need to be converted from low level to high level all the way to San Francisco. Caltrain Stadler KISS sets are set up for both, so Caltrain would have no issues by the time it could be done. The California High-Speed Rail Authority proposes that the state coordinate the portion from Gilroy to San Jose rather than take care of it themselves. The cost estimate for Bakersfield to Gilroy is $54.4 billion, and as we've discussed, they barely have the money for Bakersfield to Merced at $37 billion. They have San Jose to Gilroy costing between $3 and $6 billion. Reading this, it doesn't sound like the authority is prepared to pay for that. Who is? Who knows? Cost for platforms between Gilroy and San Francisco and additional train sets necessary for service are rolled into the $54 billion figure. The authority has ridership at between 8.7 and 11.8 million trips here with hourly service. This is between 60 and 80% of Amtrak's ridership on the Northeast Corridor, and I don't really get how that's possible. Here we're connecting metros of 4.6 million, 2 million, 1.2 million, and 900,000. The NEC connects metros of over 40 million with much better overall transit connectivity, so we have a minor disparity here. Bakersfield to San Francisco is about 300 miles. With Gilroy to San Francisco being more conventional, you're looking at something like 2.5 to 3 hours end to end. So it would be faster than the NEC, but not by a lot. Between Washington, D.C. and New York City is a similar time frame, over 70% of the distance. LA to San Diego on Amtrak's Pacific Surfliner is a similar time end to end in a much larger combined market. Ridership there is about 2 million trips a year, so someone make the numbers add up for me. If you have any idea of how the interim Bakersfield to San Francisco service could possibly quadruple the Pacific Surfliner's ridership, let me know in the comments. The authority is stating construction on the extension to Gilroy could begin around 2028. Trains would be running to San Francisco by 2038. This, of course, assumes an additional 11 to 15 billion in funding falls into place in the next 3 years. The odds against that are high, so you can likely toss that 2038 figure. I've been saying 2045 to San Francisco at the earliest. I think that's still reasonable. I'm happy to be proven wrong. I think I'm more likely to be proven wrong in the other direction. They're supposed to make money on operations between San Francisco and Bakersfield, between 275 and 600 million a year. That could be a different story if ridership doesn't show up. In the third scenario, the authority would endeavor to extend all of that from Bakersfield to Palmdale and then ultimately hook up with Brightline West at Victor Valley via the High Desert Corridor to initiate the Southwest High-Speed Rail concept. Service would be 2 trains an hour in each direction, with one southbound train terminating at Palmdale and the other at the Brightline West Victor Valley station. Cost for this is estimated at $87.12 billion, but identified funding isn't remotely that big. You know what, while we're on the subject, let's double back to some previous videos and explore options for generating that type of funding. Number 1 is the federal government, which is a big problem right now. Number 2, a gas tax. This could generate in the realm of $6 to $7 billion a year. Thirdly, a sales tax, about the same range but more socially regressive. Property tax is another one, but these revenues are largely protected by Proposition 13 and are probably more difficult to access. Another bond like the $9 billion from Prop 1A is possible. Something like that might be able to get the project to Gilroy if Merced is left off, but we'll get to that in a minute. Pretty much everyone agrees that the current means of funding are inadequate if the goal is to actually build this thing, but state officials don't seem to be in any hurry to correct that. Back to our Gilroy to Palmdale scenario, they are predicting ridership of between 12.46 and 17.94 million trips. That's 83 to 120% of Amtrak's NEC traffic. Given the tourist draw with Las Vegas and a roundabout connection to greater Los Angeles, I could maybe see the lower figure. 18 million trips seems really optimistic. At roughly 6 hours between San Francisco and both Los Angeles and Las Vegas, this would be far superior to existing rail options, but would pale in comparison to flying, even when accounting for airport hassle. Estimated operating profit is between $600 million and $1.3 billion a year. Looking at Amtrak's results on the NEC, the lower figure seems reasonable given a newer, more efficient system. That would give them an additional $600 million a year to reinvest in trying to complete Phase 1 and Phase 2. For those that don't know, the original vision for the project was a 800-mile system that would serve all of the major metropolitan areas of the state. That was broken up into Phase 1 from San Francisco to Anaheim and Phase 2, which was meant to extend that to Sacramento and San Diego. Early documents have Phase 2 costing about 50% as much as Phase 1. Cost for Phase 1 is now in the range of $140 billion, so you're looking at over $200 billion for the whole system. This is a truly astronomical sum when you're trying to tackle it with hundreds of millions. Up next is the idea that Merced is actually detrimental to the phasing of Phase 1 and should be done later. The authority projects Merced, in addition to the Gilroy scenarios, would generate a mere 60 to 80,000 additional trips per year. It would also generate less operating profit. As a result, the authority has put forth the idea of shelving Merced and coming back to it later. That could happen after Palmdale, perhaps becoming part of the Sacramento leg of Phase 2. We're talking fantasy land here, but if Merced is, quote, resequenced, as the authority has coined it, when might it be tacked back on? After Gilroy to Palmdale is done, that would be about 2055. In my mind, they might be running to San Francisco by 2045, and that might finally give the project some momentum, but Palmdale would come first after that. Next possibility, end of Phase 1. I've got that at 2075. I'm guessing LA to San Francisco won't be running in the next 50 years. And I'm willing to go further out on a limb on this one because I'll be too dead to be wrong. As part of Phase 2, 22nd century. I honestly do not see Phase 2 happening this century, but 75 years is a long time and things change. The good news is that we might be able to save the Merced in and out at MLK and 15th through its natural life cycle. It's worth mentioning here that if Merced were skipped in the interim, rail services to and from the north would hook up with California High-Speed Rail at Madera instead. That is 35 miles southeast of Merced. The planned station there would have platforms for both California High-Speed Rail and the adjacent BNSF tract that is currently utilized for passenger rail service in both Madera and Merced. Leaving Merced off and temporarily terminating at Madera on the way to Gilroy would save $3.1 billion. Combine that with the $6.3 billion left over from Merced to Bakersfield, and you're tantalizingly close to Gilroy if California High-Speed Rail can retain the $4.2 billion in grants that the Trump administration is trying to claw back. Unfortunately, skipping Merced could throw a monkey wrench into that idea, since a good portion of those grants are aimed at the extensions to Bakersfield and Merced. Let's just say it's complicated at this point. Otherwise, the authority would be about $6 billion short on Gilroy. Can they raise that kind of dough with public-private partnerships like they're talking about? That's a big question mark, but the reality is that we're now wondering if they're going to have the money to reach Gilroy instead of Merced, so the goalposts have moved. Let's talk about some ancillary benefits that the authority likes to tout, since construction and costs certainly aren't positives. Economic benefit. Big surprise, if you spend a bunch of money, you generate an economic benefit. I'd be more interested to see how the project compares to other projects, because a 9-to-14 ratio for Gilroy to Palmdale, including Merced, doesn't seem all that impressive. Emissions avoided. The reality is that electric rail is the most efficient and cleanest means of mass transportation there is, so this is real. But I think someone got some conversions wrong here. Total US CO2 equivalent emissions right now are about 4.7 gigatons a year. Here we have California High-Speed Rail saving 513 gigatons a year. Even if this were in kilotons, which would be a correctish conversion from vehicle miles traveled, cutting 10% of all US emissions seems unlikely. The state only accounts for 12% of the country's population, and this would be a small fraction of its traffic. Mentioned on the previous page, they're also going to have some local benefits by reducing smog and particulate emissions. Generally, the impact has been overstated, and you can see they have to stretch things out to a 50-year time frame here to come up with a compelling statistic. Regulatory streamlining. Here we find out that government regulation makes it more difficult to get things done. This is no surprise to anyone that's owned a business. So what can we do about it? The general idea from the transit community here is that since a project like this is a massive environmental win, it should be easier to get it through environmental frameworks like the California Environmental Quality Act and the National Environmental Policy Act. The authority echoes that with suggestions of targeted process streamlining aimed at the various aspects of the project, including energy and permitting. It's worth mentioning here that California High-Speed Rail will get its energy from solar and batteries along the right-of-way, so getting that all in place in a timely manner is important. The authority would like dedicated court resources to clear out inevitable conflicts and lawsuits more quickly, and then some sort of regulatory streamlining of interactions with third parties like railroads and utilities. It's a laundry list of things that have held the project up in the past, made scheduling difficult, and caused cost overruns. But it's merely an ask. Whether or not the state legislature does anything is another matter. As an example, California SB 445, which would have streamlined permitting, was amended to death and then ultimately derailed in committee. And lastly, legislation currently implicitly requires that the authority complete a double-tracked railway between Merced and Bakersfield by capping the amount of funding that can be spent outside of the Central Valley until that takes place. The authority would like to sidestep that by having that cap removed on its way to Gilroy and/or Palmdale. For this chart, I'd like to point out that these California high-speed rail amounts are erroneous at best. At roughly $140 billion, cost per mile should be $280 million plus. Total years to plan and build, 15 years. Really? It's been 17 years already, and it would be a miracle if it ended up being less than 40. In that context, the project does not fare well here, except compared to HS2, which is another infamously busted project. In this section, they're talking about what it's going to take to fund things on a per-year basis, considering different financing timelines. Here, the 45-year periods run at 75% more expensive. Like in the case of Gilroy to Palmdale, that would increase the cost to the state from $90 billion to $170 billion. So unless you just love paying taxes, if you want to see this thing done, you might want to favor getting it done sooner than later, because the government will take your money and burn half of it on interest payments. There are 12 appendices on this thing, but we're only going to look at 2. Design criteria. One of the reasons California high-speed rail is so expensive is that its curve and grade design criteria are relatively conservative, combined with an aggressive design goal of accommodating 250 mph travel. This results in very large curves and more tunneling than is necessary. The authority has changed that, aiming future curves at 220 mph, which is the system's intended top operational speed. Previously, the maximum grade was 3.5%. It says 2.5 here, but that's a typo because the segment going up the Tehachapi grade is 2.8% nearly the whole way. This combines with a baseline grade of 1.25% to create a lot of expensive infrastructure. The authority has changed that to 4% and 3.5% respectively, which will allow them to cut down on tunneling and structures like viaduct by better conforming to changes in grade on the ground. They're talking about cutting the tunneling in the Tehachapis and Pacheco Pass in half, which would be a huge savings. However, those savings are already built into the new cost estimates, so who knows what the cost of this thing really was. That is also likely to require additional environmental review. However, they may be able to get away with an environmental reassessment like Brightline West did from Victorville to Las Vegas. That is quicker and less costly than a full environmental impact statement. If these criteria had been in place 15 years ago, the project would probably be further along now, saving time on land acquisition for all the enormous curves out in the Central Valley. Another important change is cutting clearance on overcrossings from 27 to 16 feet. The structures built in the Central Valley are oddly huge, and this would bring new ones closer to a typical freeway interaction size, cutting time and cost on earthworks. Last is a cost-benefit analysis of the various scenarios in the report. I don't know how accurate this is. For instance, $4 billion in benefits to emergency vehicles seems a little inflated. The key takeaways here for me are that Merced to Bakersfield by itself has more cost than benefit over a 30-year period, reiterating that it would be foolish for the state to stop construction at that point. Number 2 is that the cost-benefit ratio of scenarios including Merced are lower than ones without it. More evidence that Merced might be doomed for now, but it depends what the legislature does with this information. And now we reach the conclusion. Let's summarize. Number 1, California high-speed rail should be running in the Central Valley within 10 years. Get ready. Number 2, we're now talking about how to fund Gilroy instead of Merced. Number 3, Gilroy is currently $2 to $7 billion short if Merced is skipped. Number 4, there are suggestions to streamline execution, but none to adequately fund the larger project. Number 5, no mention of how in the world they're getting to Los Angeles. Number 6, the longer this takes to execute, the more expensive it's going to get, and it's already pushing $150 billion just for Phase 1, LA to San Francisco. Number 7, Merced might be doomed in the midterm. Number 8, lastly and most importantly, we cannot allow this project to be stuck in the Central Valley. Things looked grim only a few days ago. Now the situation is a tiny bit better, but a long way from being resolved. The rhetoric from the state government supports the project, but its actions don't measure up. While the public technically supports the project, they're also highly apathetic about it and collectively don't think it will ever get done. So basically, almost no one gives a real crap one way or the other, which is fascinating. But what do you think? Do you give a crap? Can this sinking ship right itself, or is it doomed to meet Davy Jones? Or a third option, does it become a zombie destined to shamble on in search of brains? Plenty more videos are on their way. Up next, we're taking a ride on the new Acela 2 to see what it's like, thanks to friend of the channel Roadrunner from Rhode Island. There's that and many other topics to explore to the end of the year. There are a couple of extra ways to support the channel if you like. Hit that super thanks button below the video or check out my Printify Railroad poster store by following the link or QR code and buying yourself a nifty poster. But that's all for now. Until next time, I'll see you on that big beautiful freeway.